Barker. I'm from Stockholm University, and I just wanted to give an update on my new research project. I've just started a new book, and it has leaves off from my book on this Sweden's response to the solidarity crisis in 2015. It begins where that left off in terms of thinking about borders and their externalization. So my previous book was really concerned about how Sweden responded in the domestic politics and the history of the welfare state in its desire to close off borders to migrants or newcomers. This new project really starting to get off the ground this summer when a Italian Coast Guard ship docked in off Sicily with a group of people who are seeking asylum, and the Italian government refused to dock them, and they called around, and the Swedish government also refused to dock them. So I was very curious about how this could possibly come about, and I wanted to start looking at the pushing the borders back further and further, where even ships at sea were being kept from docking and people were being kept from disembarking. So I'm examining kind of a broad spectrum of activities that are going on in the Mediterranean and beyond the land borders of the Mediterranean, looking at the EU-Turkey deal, for example, and how the EU is sending asylum seekers back who had landed in Greece, who are now being sent back to Turkey and being kept in places of confinement there. Also, I'm very interested in how Swedish foreign policy is playing a role in basically pushing the Swedish border back further and further, and looking at the role of development aid to particular countries in Africa and how the acceptance of that aid is dependent upon these countries fulfilling migration control, preventing mobility. When it's often the case for economic growth and development, countries should have open borders, but many of these countries are being asked to do migration control. I'm also, in this new project, very curious and interested in the historical links. So the previous book on Sweden also looked at the history of the welfare state to say this wasn't really new, this was part of a similar logic. And I'm curious to see whether or not we can link up some of the current developments towards some familiar historical patterns where those in criminology, we've studied penal colonies and the movement of people, movement of people into penal colonies to keep them from moving, right, to kind of control their mobility and linking crime and migration during this period of colonization. So I'm very curious to see if there are contemporary links, if that was a different phenomenon, if it's the same phenomenon, but this kind of large-scale control and management of migration through penal controls, right, and also through the increasing role of a whole slew of actors, right, including the military. So I'm developing this concept about imperialism, penal imperialism, to really track the historical movements with the contemporary period.